We're starting with John Busby, who's VP of Marchex Institute, which is a division within Marchex that really uses some of the data that's coming out of their core product. Their core product, many of you are familiar with, is to drive and track and monetize calls to businesses of all different sizes. And as a byproduct of that core product, they're coming out with all kinds of interesting data sets that are really revealing of where a lot of opportunities lie for kind of strategy development and just kind of interesting tidbits. So first, please join me in welcoming John. So what we'll do, John, is first, before we get into it, just for the sake of context,
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and about both Marchex Institute and the broader company for those unfamiliar.
Sure. Thanks, Mike, and thanks for having me. So Marchex delivers phone calls to businesses on a pay-for-call basis, and then we also analyze those calls to help businesses make the most out of their mobile advertising. That's our product called the Digital Call Marketplace, and it's all built upon a technology platform we have to measure phone calls called Marchex Call Analytics, which is a call tracking and analytics product used by thousands of companies to measure the results of their advertising. And then we also have a product which we call Marchex Local Leads that is a full-service, white-labeled digital advertising solution for resellers to small businesses. Now, what my team does, the Marchex Institute, we're a research and insights team, and we analyze and evaluate the phone calls that we drive to businesses to better understand mobile advertising. And all of the data that we're going to be going through today are from studies that my team has done around the phone calls that are generated by mobile advertising to businesses and specifically to local businesses.
Great, that's a great intro. So we'll get right into it. And as John alluded to, we're going to go through 5 or 6 different kind of data slices of the interesting things that they've come up with. So we'll march right through them. So first off, this one's kind of fun. We'll start off on kind of the lighter side. This is both a cultural phenomenon / comment, but also some interesting takeaways. I'll let you start and kind of being the one that assembled the data. What's happening here?
Sure. This is a study that we released on Valentine's Day, and we were just looking to do something fun with respect to males and females and what they do when calling businesses from mobile devices. And this study went viral. I guess not Harlem Shuffle viral, but
right.
Anyway, it was picked up by the USA Today and some other publications that found it pretty interesting. And just to give some context, this data is derived from more than 100,000 calls placed to small businesses from mobile advertising in 2013 and 2012. And the way that we know whether or not it's a man or woman calling is by leveraging speech-to-text technology, which looks at the pitch, the tone, the frequency of the caller to determine whether or not they are male or female. And what we found really surprised us, and that was that men call more often from mobile advertising. Men talk longer, pretty significantly longer, on average more than a minute longer. Men say more words and they say more words per minute, so asking more deeper questions than their female counterparts when calling small businesses. It was something that we found to be unexpected. I guess we would classify it as unexpected because a bunch of folks picked it up and wanted to write about it. But it also, to me, speaks to what we find when we unpack data on mobile. Mobile almost always is different than the PC, and so much of the data that we find from mobile is really unexpected.
And I think that the hidden message there, too, in addition to some interesting data points, is, yes, because it's unexpected, don't bring too many assumptions into mobile strategy development, because sometimes it, defies that logic. But it is interesting because sometimes the expectation out there, probably based on stereotypes, is that women are more chatty. This
Right.
This kind of goes against that. But in some cases, it's almost logical that guys probably like to talk about cars once on the phone talking about it, or maybe they go bankrupt and lose their keys more often.
Right.
For these other ones. But no, another interesting point here is that your technology allows you to define based on the pitch of voice male versus female, is there the opportunity to then identify that incoming phone number as such and then use that in the future in terms of optimizing incoming calls or advertising certain products that might be demographically targeted as such?
Yeah, I think so. I think on the PC, there's been a lot of development as to making custom experiences based on what you know about the user. And the same thing can happen on a phone call. So when someone calls, if they've called you before and you know they're an existing customer, it offers you the opportunity to focus your message or notification to a call center to upsell that customer rather than give them a new sales representative. It also provides the opportunity to route that customer in a different way. And if you know based on past experience that they're male or female, you can do different things with the landing page. And I think in mobile, the landing page is an IVR or the play file that you provide to a caller at the outset of a call, as opposed to the literal landing page that we see on the web.
So, provide a male voice as the IVR versus a female voice in certain situations, or and other nuances probably, right?
Yeah, and we're trying to test those assumptions right now, and it's fairly easy for us to do. I don't yet have some groundbreaking thing to say about which IVR to use in which case, but we're testing and experimenting there, and I think it's really ripe for optimization and exploration.
Absolutely.
One more thing I want to say about this is oftentimes in mobile, we assume that we can't measure the user because we don't have cookies, and we don't have other things that...
UDID and other...
other things that we've grown accustomed to in the PC world. But when someone makes a phone call, and that's really probably the best indication that these types of users have intent to purchase a product or service, from that phone number, there's a lot of information that you can derive to get smarter about the users that are interacting with you. And our good friends at Neustar who are here are folks that provide information on phone numbers, as do many other vendors.
That's interesting. It's not just what's said in the call, but before the call is even answered, based on the area code and exchange, there's certain demographic targeting that's possible. So really interesting stuff. Moving on, this is an interesting one too. So you've measured incoming calls to hotels and car rental, and found, based on the kind of call transcription, the types of things being mentioned is telling of an opportunity for small business differentiation because it's not being served by online aggregators or things like that. So you can unpack this a bit further.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So this slide and the next slide get to the question of as mobile local search continues to explode, is this good for local businesses or is it bad for local businesses? And I think this gets to the side of the coin that it's good for small businesses. The reason we did this study, which we released in January, was to understand when it's so easy to book a hotel room and a rental car, why the heck would so many people be calling from mobile advertising? And so we wanted to understand why this was the case. And besides some categories of users who are deal seekers, or some categories of users who are technophobes who would almost never use an online booking, although those folks are dwindling, we found a category of users that we would call special requesters. And so the reason that you would call to book a hotel room are things like, I really want to understand the rooms that you can offer me. I want to understand the view out of my hotel room. I want to understand what the child care options are. One set of calls that we analyzed were about folks who wanted to stay at a hotel in Washington, D.C. around the time that Obama was going to be inaugurated in January. And the idea was, is this hotel close to that inauguration site? Things that you can't really get online. And the same thing with a car rental service. I had a recent accident. I'm on the highway. I need to rent a car. I have a complex reason for booking. These are all the reasons why people make phone calls. And so consumers need local questions answered. And I think that provides a really great opportunity for local businesses to differentiate themselves against aggregators and lead generators because oftentimes you need to have a specific question answered that just can't be done by, let's say, a national call center.
Yep. It's a good finding. And are you also finding that these queries coming in via phone because they can't be taken care of online are also resulting in the same call in a conversion in a lot of cases?
You're asking what the conversion rate is?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the calls are coming in because they need these queries, but are those resulting in those same calls? Are conversions happening as well?
Yeah. So the conversion rate in this study was fairly high. I think if memory serves, it was 20 to 25% conversion rate in both categories at a minimum. But we don't want to make calls to small businesses. We need to make calls to small businesses, and so that means that we have we're really invested in the phone call, and we often want to buy or make a purchase decision. And so that's why we find this this type of outcome as part of a mobile advertisement, a phone call, is really valuable for businesses.
Absolutely, and it seems like it makes sense in certain categories, these being clear ones. We talked about pizza yesterday, where it's the type of thing that can be brought online. There's probably an inherent touch point that's not as required within some verticals than others, but it's a great takeaway for these and probably some others that I imagine you'll continue to study. Yeah,
that's right. I think that that for pizza, which may be less of a high consideration product,
right.
except when I call, I have
are your anchovies fresh?
Can you do a gluten-free crust?
Sure.
All the kind of garbage we do in Seattle. But and anyway, so those are the reasons that I call Pizza Company. But I agree.
Okay, let's move on. Good stuff here. So this is an interesting one too, and brings up a kind of long-standing challenge in local. You guys and a lot of other companies do a lot of work to send quality leads to businesses. However, the whole thing falls down when they don't answer the damn phone.
That's right.
So you kind of put a little bit more of a quantitative analysis behind this. Yeah,
I would say this is the other side of the coin. If needing local questions answered levels the playing field for small businesses, I'd think that this is the real area that hurts small businesses and it also hurts all of us who want to drive calls to small businesses. I thought what Chris was saying in the previous panel around the user experience of advertising being really important, I totally agree with, and that user experience really falls flat when you have taken the time to make a local search, you're ready to call this business and they don't answer the phone. It's a real problem. And in most industries we found the average rate of unanswered calls exceeds 20%. And again, this is across many calls and many verticals. It happens across the board. And I think that there's an area of investment that we can all make to help small businesses answer the phone. And something that we're experimenting with something that we call call rescue, where if we identify that a call is unlikely to be answered, that we route it to someone who may answer the phone. I know from personal experience, we had our porch redone this summer, and I wanted to find a provider, and I was calling a bunch of providers, and the first 3 didn't answer the phone. The first one that answered the phone and answered my questions about it was the person who came and provided a bid. We didn't end up going with that person,
sure.
But it just speaks to just being there when someone wants to reach you is as important as anything else in this.
Especially for quality leads. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier, by virtue of your work with Newstar, being able to tell a call coming in based on the area code and exchange, or based on the fact it's coming from mobile, other different indicators that this might be a call you don't want to miss.
That's right.
And also in these categories. So to kind of give this a little more color, automotive here refers to automotive sales, right? So dealers, not actually, no, it's both. It's
dealers, service. I should have explained this. Dealers, service, places that you would call to get you to either buy an auto,
sure,
or service it.
The point being high consideration, high margin leads that you don't want to be missing. Same thing with multifamily housing. This is apartment buildings and rental offices where we're talking about potentially a 12-month lease. So, big purchases here. You don't want to be missing these calls. So, and your point is also well taken. I want to reiterate, it seems like there's an opportunity out there to solve this problem. You mentioned your kind of call rescue service, things like that can, help small businesses, not only in the subject that we always talk about, sending them good leads, but help them capture it. I think, it's clearly you're seeing there's a missing element in the marketplace there. So this is supportive of the previous point in that you don't want to be missing mobile calls. Talk a little bit about this. You measured, this kind of goes along the lines of a lot of the support of mobile that we've been talking about throughout this conference. More stats about how quality leads are coming from not just mobile calls, but ones that have best practices behind the demand generation and advertising that you're doing that have proper calls to action to call the business. When you do it right, you can see great results like this.
Yeah, that's right. I think it feels great to be part of the mobile advertising community because when consumers are invested in researching a product or service on their smartphone, they're very interested in buying that product or service. It just keeps coming up again and again in the data. There's a great study from Google and Nielsen that I think came out last week, just about when mobile consumers convert. They generally convert within an hour. We see that as well, and in real time, essentially, as people are viewing an ad, making a phone call, making a purchase or appointment right there. What we wanted to attempt to do in this slide was to quantify across categories some of the conversion rates that we're seeing when people place a phone call. And maybe just a caveat to the data, when we say a phone call here, we mean the phone calls minus like accidental clicks or calls and sort of spam calls or robocalls. When we charge customers through pay for call, we filter all those types of calls out before we charge advertisers because there is a lot of noise in mobile. But once you get past that, mobile consumers are overwhelmingly buyers. So multifamily housing, for those who aren't familiar, it's like property managers at apartment complexes or rental units. People are in high volumes are mentioning leases or contracts in calls. We talked about automotive before. People either providing lead information, asking about a make or model, providing contact information. Travel, this is the study that we referenced in a couple slides ago. And then home services, I suppose it's obligatory to mention plumbers. Someone tweeted that a few days ago. I thought it was funny. I've done so here. And then for home improvement and home services categories, many of the first calls lead to appointments. So it's really very fruitful for businesses.
Very, and I'm glad you mentioned the Google Nielsen statistic. I believe it was follow-on activity based on mobile search, whatever conversions and calls and other things that happen after that, 63% of them happen within the hour. So it just speaks to the immediacy and the buying intent, which is very much behind this slide as well. I'm glad you also mentioned, you alluded to some of the practices of discerning quality calls from non-quality calls, robocalls or hang-ups. What are some other things, just high level? I mean, I imagine there's a time limit for a quality call versus, and probably a number of other things, but just to give the audience an idea of, how you're qualifying that.
Sure, yeah. So in addition to sort of filtering out folks that we know are solicitors or spammers because they've called us lots of times in the past.
You tag that number.
Yeah, so we identify in real time whether that person is likely to be a spammer or not, and if they are, we don't route the call. But beyond that, there are metrics such as duration, whether or not that consumer, even if they're not a spammer, whether or not they've called before. And in some industries, it's important to ask a question through an IVR up front. Thank you for calling this business. Press 1 if you're interested in making a new reservation. Press 2 if you're calling to change or cancel an existing reservation, and only charging for new consumers.
Interesting.
For like one-time purchase products, that's really important. Higher consideration products, that's really important so that you're not funneling all of your advertising dollars into getting customers existing customers
taken care of.
Yeah, like in auto insurance, you want people calling to receive a quote, not people because they just got their address or they got in an accident and they need the roadside assistance to come. So thanks for asking.
Sure, absolutely. So moving on, this is an interesting one as well. And Matt Booth actually showed a similar version of this slide yesterday. Really interesting takeaway here, pointing to the fact that a lot of people moving into mobile are taking, whether it be desktop tendencies or just really the misaligned goals in terms of the campaigns they're running or how they're measuring them. And I think your data here, which you can explain, I think characterizes that.
Right. In mobile, we have to measure things differently. I love the last panel and the discussion on native because it was about like let's get users to really engage naturally with whatever channel they're in, and so when it comes to brand advertising, I think that's really important. I love what those companies are doing. With respect to performance advertising, impressions, clicks, and phone calls just don't cut it. And the reason is that there are so many accidental clicks and calls that occur from mobile display. It happens from unscrupulous publishers, sure, but it also happens because of the form factor of the device, because we're intending to play a word with friends, and we hit the banner ad by mistake. And so I didn't talk about the data exactly. This is, I think, more than a dozen campaigns from 7 mobile display networks, and on average, it took 500,000 impressions to generate 2,500 clicks, 30 calls, and 1 high-quality call.
And it says a lot about if you're the type of businesses that values calls and that's your end game, you shouldn't be running CPM-based campaigns. And if you do, you're probably overpaying and not getting the results you want either way.
Right. Brands and really everybody needs to insist in mobile on paying for outcomes, I think, to ensure quality.
And I think we're moving that way, but it's kind of a learning curve of Madison Avenue and other kind of pieces of this ecosystem, right?
Right.
So this is the last one, and this is kind of a bonus. We said there were going to be 5, but this is a great one. You put up a blog post right in the wake of Google's enhanced campaigns, and there's been a lot of talk about that throughout this conference, and for good reason. But you had an interesting take, and I did a column where I kind of quoted you because I thought it was such a good kind of soundbite, for lack of a better term. But among all the other aspects of Google's enhanced campaigns, one of the things it's going to do by kind of unifying campaigns across desktop, mobile, and tablet is to kind of force SMBs finally into this adoption cycle of mobile. And because they're going to be showing up there, their learning curve will accelerate because they'll be forced to become astute at it. And I think that includes a lot of the things you guys are working on, like generating calls, things like that. So add a little bit more about kind of your premise here.
Sure. Well, I guess I would say that we're excited about the prospects of Google Enhanced Campaigns. For those of you who don't know what they are, it's a new type of campaign released by Google, which has some nifty features like bidding by location and the inclusion of call counting and app downloads along with your click information within campaign reporting. But it also requires every campaign to include both desktop and mobile.
And tablet.
And tablet, thank you. It's a little bit curious in the sense that Google has generally predicated its product development on more flexibility for marketers.
Right.
And in requiring customers to have each campaign include every single medium, I think there's a little tension there. But at the same time, by having all of these SMBs that are not in Google's mobile auction sort of forced into the mobile auction, it's going to create some interesting dynamics for the marketplace, one of which I expect there to be increased pricing pressure within the mobile ad auction. So I think that's going to be a pretty big deal. And it's also going to place a premium on cross-channel measurement and attribution. Prior to enhanced campaigns, I think you could take your desktop campaign and focus it on one type of outcome, and your mobile campaign and focus it on another type of outcome. But if consumers want to interact with your website, fill out a lead form, make a phone call, and go inside your store, then marketers need to think about all of these outcomes as part of their campaigns and how it affects their bid prices. And it's really going to make ROI calculations, I think, more difficult at first, but for marketers that can take advantage of it, there's a real opportunity there.
That's interesting too, and you mentioned that there's going to be an opportunity around the fact that there is cross-campaign analytics, and that's going to continue to evolve. Do you see an ecosystem for third parties to come along and manage that? The people in this room that are various forms of publishers and media companies that are working with advertisers, do you see an opportunity there to kind of manage that for them now that things have become somewhat more complex?
Yeah, totally. I think that in PC-based paid search, a lot of web analytics companies have done great over the last 10 to 15 years in helping to make e-commerce e-commerce solutions and lead forms really work. And I think that with mobile, as we know that consumers want to go inside a store after making a local search or making a phone call or downloading an app, the notion of analytics needs to expand. And for all of those in this room that invest in those things, there's a real opportunity for all of us to become those types of measurement companies or solutions for these other types of outcomes.
Great. I think that's well said and a good way to end it, and we're about out of time. So please join me in thanking John. Great information. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.